We've all had one of those days that doesn't go as planned. We're hoping this is not that day. But let me share with you a day. I'm in this large, cavernous discount shopping store doing clothes shopping, which I don't really like to do. And I'm beginning to work my way down this aisle. It's very tightly packed with clothes, almost claustrophobic, but it also seems to extend infinitely into the distance. Now, despite the fact that the store is almost completely empty, I notice there's a woman in my aisle. Typical, right? And to my horror, I realize, even worse, we're going to have to do the shimmy. You know, that really awkward, you go left, I go right, and you slide by one another. You know, as an American with a preferred social distance of at least 100 feet, this is very uncomfortable for me to consider. So we've been sort of exchanging glances out of the corner of our eyes, and this is sad to admit, but I don't particularly like this woman. White, middle-aged woman. She seems really oblivious to our predicament, and she's not very responsive, to me. And I realize it's even worse than that. She seems really entitled to be in my aisle. But I'm looking over her shoulder, and I see that perfect outfit that I just know I want. So I know I'm not the only crazy person that talks to themselves. I can tell you all talk to yourself too. So I start having this internal conversation. Why don't you like that woman? Just get over it. Look her in the eye and deal with the situation. Well, I didn't look at her directly because I didn't like what I saw out of the corner of my eye. I didn't want to be with her. I didn't want to talk with her. I didn't even want to have any social interaction. There wasn't any part of me that thought, maybe this is an opportunity to get to know someone, exchange a smile. I think there's something there, a basic realization. We don't like to look at things that make us uncomfortable, that get too close, that require intimacy or opening up. We want people and things and ideas to confirm what we already believe. We want life to turn out as planned, right? At my day job at James Madison's Montpelier, I've been wondering a lot about what makes us comfortable and not comfortable, and what we see and don't see as Americans. For one, I want everyone to see the story of the U.S. Constitution in all its radical beauty. I'm really fond of this narrative of a young, scrappy country throwing off the rule of a king, crowdsourcing a blueprint for a new kind of government, and creating and then adopting a constitution that many people, historians, consider a hinge point in human history. And that still resonates and inspires people all over the world today who want government by the people. But I think that's only a little part of the story. We're only remembering part of the narrative. There's a whole other half of our story where that same Constitution codified slavery without ever using the word. Our origin story, our founding, is based on freedom and slavery. It's in our democratic DNA. And this is something I think many African American families know just from their own family history, but a lot of us flat out deny, forget, or don't see. Now, I can tell it got really quiet and everyone's worried, oh no, she's going to get political. I swear I'm not. There's a lot of that going around right now. Instead, I want to get personal. Growing up, I was pretty oblivious to issues about race. When you hear where I lived, you're going to go, she must have been in a military family. But that's not true. My father is a water resource planner. He's here today, and he just liked to move. So I'm going to give you my list. Utah, Wyoming, before high school. Utah, Wyoming, California, New Mexico, Wisconsin, 3 places, Idaho, Maine, Nebraska, and finally Virginia. Growing up this way, I saw a geographically diverse United States. It was fantastic. But let's face it, most of the communities I'm growing up in, everyone looks just like me, right? And I had some beautiful, beautiful places growing up, but it left me with a few holes. I'm going to share just one story. Growing up in rural Maine, we had a field trip once a year to a theater in Bangor, the big city of Bangor, and we saw 5 years in a row the same film 5 years in a row. You're getting the rhythm here, right? And that film was Gone with the Wind, which I frankly absorbed as a documentary film about the South. In case, I'm just letting the rest of you know, it's not. Yeah. Since then, I've really had the privilege of having most of my work life here in Virginia. Went to the University of Virginia, not once, but twice, wahoo-wah. And I've had some really interesting jobs and opportunities. But I moved back from Montana to Virginia 5 years ago because I was so interested in and as equally baffled by our American story. Yeah, I told people, I want to be part of telling a more complete American story. But honestly, I didn't really know what I was talking about. Since then, I've been hearing a lot, and I'm sure you have too. What is our American story? Who owns the narrative? There was this really passionate, fabulous talk by the mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, recently. And in this talk, he was talking about, hey, what are we doing with the Civil War monuments and about their decision to take some of them down. He says in this talk, and this was so true for me, I must have walked by those monuments a million times and never given them a second thought. And then he went on to share, hey, I'm not judging anybody. I don't judge people. We all take our own journey on race. And I've been taking my own journey too at Montpelier. We recently opened a new exhibition about slavery and the Constitution. And I had the good fortune to be able to learn more about race and slavery from people who were descended from folks who'd been enslaved on James Madison's plantation. I had a chance to learn from Rebecca Gilmore Coleman. Now, Rebecca is the great-granddaughter of George Gilmore, and after emancipation, he built the little white cabin across the entrance from Montpelier. Rebecca is with us here today, so thank you, Rebecca, for being here. Rebecca very poignantly describes herself as being 3 generations removed from being enslaved at Montpelier. And Rebecca is also the woman who had the courage 20 years ago to drive down that long winding road and say to the people who were working at Montpelier then, hey, there's some very important and interesting stories to tell here. Tell our story. I've also had a chance to get to know Margaret Jordan, and she is the 3rd great-granddaughter of Paul Jennings. Now, Margaret, who lives in Texas and serves on our board, is rightfully proud of her ancestor, Paul Jennings. He led an epic life that can really inspire all of us. He's born into slavery at Montpelier. He's credited as a young man for helping to save the portrait of George Washington when the White House was burned by the British in 1812. He gains his own freedom completely by the dint of his own effort. Then he goes on and he uses his freedom to save others in the Underground Railroad. And he writes the first account of life in the White House. It's amazing. And I also learned from the Descendants that a complete story would honor all their ancestors in their individuality, their courage, their genius. It would make what has been largely invisible visible. Folks are frankly tired of people being sort of extras in some movie about progress. People who lived and died as just some sort of tragic footnotes. The Descendants also shared with me that a complete story would not leave slavery as an artifact of the past, but it would face up to the legacies of slavery in our society and our country today. So, I've been really fortunate. I'm getting to see a more complete story, even the parts that don't make me very comfortable. And it is changing the way I see America. And maybe that's why I was so shocked by what happened on August 12th in Charlottesville. I can't forget that day, and I bet many of you here in the theater were here as well. On that day, I came to the downtown mall with 2 of my best friends, Dorothy and Sonia, and we were there to support Sonia's daughter, who was going to be a counter-protester. We wanted to be witnesses and kind of offer whatever moral courage or protection we could. You know, when I look back on that day, I got to say, I was pretty darn naive. You know, it's one of those moments. And, you know, I felt like I was a soccer ant showing up to cheer on the kids, right? What we ran into that day was a wall of hate. You know, how was I really going to protect anybody, even though I wanted to, from those men who are walking around with AR-15s? How was what I wanted to say that day going to be heard over the fighting with the sticks and the clubs? We can talk intellectually about the First and Second Amendments colliding, the monument debate, or how a small city got overwhelmed by a network of hate groups, or how a national conversation has ripped the scabs off a city with a painful past and present. But what I really saw and felt for the first time that day was how personal the conversation about race in America has to get for us to get through it. I hated the hate. I hated that the police couldn't or wouldn't protect me. I hated that I felt totally powerless. I hated that on a day I thought love was going to triumph over hate, hate beat the crap out of love. And I hated that even the enemies on that day could invoke the founding myths of America as their mission statement. That day, I saw a lot of unfinished business in this project we call democracy. And since then, I've had literally hundreds of what now conversations, and I bet you have too. I, you, we are all part of community. And I know that you're working on ways to make our society a better place. Maybe you've been metaphorically walking down that aisle in the discount clothing store, and you're beginning to see someone coming towards you out of the corner of your eye. You know, you're beginning to make calculations about him or her, you know, insulating yourself from the interaction. If they're different from you, it'd be okay just to do a brief murmur of acknowledgement, right, and slide on by. They don't want to talk to you any more than you want to talk to them, right? And by the way, they may be way too lefty, or they're closet conservative, or they have incivility written all over them, right? Well, going back to my day in that discount clothing store, some of these thoughts are sort of going through my head, sad to say. But I really want that outfit that I can see over that woman's shoulder. So as we get closer and closer, and she's not getting out of the way, I take charge of the situation. I stand up very tall, I suck in my stomach, and I execute my slide-by ankle move and walk right into a mirror. Yep, that oblivious, entitled woman in the aisle was me. That woman I was resenting and very annoyed by was me. That person that I just knew was going to take something I wanted from me was me. We all have our blind spots and the things that we don't want to face up to. But we have this amazing moment as individuals, as a community, and as a nation to really step up and for the first time know our history and our story more completely. I know my job is to look up and to have the courage to face those truths that are hidden, to look into the eyes of the stranger or into the eyes staring back at me from the mirror, but to have the courage to take it all in. Thank you.
Thank you.